How did my classmate bring shame to himself by refusing to work? I'm in college for a very difficult dual degree, the kind of program that eats your time, your energy, and your sanity, and then asks for more. The pressure is relentless, but for me, it's more than just grades on a transcript. My stipend depends on maintaining perfect marks, and that stipend is the thin line between me and losing everything. I'm estranged from my family and disabled, which means I don't have a safety net. Without the stipend, I can't study, I can't stay here, and my entire future collapses. Right now, I'm holding on to a flawless academic record, the equivalent of a perfect A, and I'm determined to keep it that way. I've sacrificed too much to let anything jeopardize it. But this semester, the universe decided to test just how badly I wanted it. Our final project was a group assignment. That sentence alone was enough to make me anxious. Group work is the worst-case scenario for someone in my position. My future doesn't just depend on my work, now it depends on someone else's too. And this wasn't a simple report or presentation, it was a monster of a project. A research essay on a topic relevant to our field, a scientific poster, a 30-minute presentation, and a live Q&A session with professors afterward. 6 weeks, 3 people, 1 shared grade. I was placed in a group of 3, me, a guy I'll call Mark, and another one I'll just call Dipshit, because no other name fits. Mark was cool, engaged, responsible, the kind of person who actually cared about doing well. We clicked immediately, and I felt a wave of relief knowing at least one person in this group wasn't going to sink us. Then there was Dipshit. From the very first day, I could tell he was going to be a problem. We set up a clear plan on day 1, tasks divided, check-in meetings scheduled, deadlines mapped out. It was foolproof, or at least it would have been if everyone cared. The first check-in, Dipshit showed up late and without his laptop. Annoying, but maybe he had a rough day. The second check-in, he didn't show up at all. When we finally got hold of him, he mumbled something about sending the data tomorrow. Then tomorrow turned into almost done, and almost done turned into nothing. When we finally pressed him to be honest, he shrugged and admitted he hadn't done a single thing. Not one line of code, not one piece of analysis, not one page of writing. And then, as if that wasn't enough, he told us, to our faces, that he wasn't going to do anything. His reason? I don't care about this grade, he said flatly. You can fail 3 finals and still pass the program. So whatever, I felt my chest tighten. I explained that I couldn't afford to fail, that this wasn't just about a letter grade. It was about my livelihood, my ability to stay in school, my future. If we failed, I could lose everything. And his response, well, it's not my problem that you're broke. I swear for a second I couldn't breathe. That was the moment something inside me hardened. If he was going to treat this like a joke, fine, but he had just declared war on the wrong person. Mark and I sat down that night and made a new plan, one that didn't include him. We decided to proceed exactly as scheduled, with one crucial difference. We wouldn't remind Dipshit about any of our meetings. If he didn't care enough to show up, that was on him. And just as we predicted, he completely forgot about every single one. We spent those 6 weeks working like our futures depended on it, because for me, it did. I handled the research and wrote Dipshit's section myself, making sure every argument was airtight. Mark compiled and analysed all the interview data and designed a poster that looked like something out of a professional conference. We rehearsed our presentation until it was seamless and even prepared for the brutal Q&A session afterward. And we weren't done there. We gathered proof of Dipshit's refusal to contribute, screenshots, messages, attendance logs, and took it straight to our professor. We explained the situation calmly and showed the evidence. The professor didn't even hesitate. He told us to clearly label who did what in the final submission and assured us he'd grade each of us individually based on our contributions. For the first time since this disaster of a group formed, I felt a spark of hope. Dipshit thought he could coast on our work. He was about to learn how wrong he was. The night before the presentation, he suddenly popped back into the group chat, a ghost returning from the dead. What am I supposed to talk about? He asked. I stared at the screen for a long time before replying, as we agreed, everyone presents the part they wrote. A few minutes later, but I don't know what to say. I only wrote half a page. Tough luck, I wrote. Figure it out. You had 6 weeks. He had no access to our shared files. He never once brought his laptop to any meeting, and no idea what the rest of the project even looked like. Tomorrow, he would have to stand in front of the entire class and 2 professors and talk for 10 minutes about nothing. and I couldn't wait to watch it happen. The morning of the presentation felt like the calm before a storm, the kind where the sky is too quiet, the air too still, and you know something is about to break. I woke up nauseous from the pressure. This grade wasn't just another number in a gradebook, it was a direct line to whether I would keep my stipend and stay in this program at all. Months of work, sleepless nights, and my entire future were riding on the next few hours. Mark and I met early to run through the presentation one last time. Our slides were flawless, the poster was sharp and professional, and we knew the material inside and out. We had rehearsed the transitions between our parts until they flowed like one voice. We even predicted the types of questions the professors would ask and had answers ready for each. Dipshit, of course, was nowhere to be found. He hadn't messaged us again since last night's panic. I imagined him frantically Googling our topic for the first time in 6 weeks, or pacing around his room, trying to figure out how to wing 10 minutes of speaking time on material he had never read. A dark, petty satisfaction twisted in my chest. This was the bed he made. Now he had to lie in it. When the time came, the three of us sat together in the front row, waiting for our turn. Dipshit slumped in his seat, avoiding eye contact. He looked pale, sweaty, like someone walking to the gallows. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Our group was called. We walked to the front of the lecture hall, the room silent except for the shuffle of papers and the low hum of the projector. I could feel my heart beat in my ears. The two professors sat at a table with clipboards and pens, and the rest of the class watched from their seats. I went first. That had been the plan all along. My section introduced our topic, laid the foundation for the problem we were studying, and built a bridge for Mark and Dipshit to step onto. My voice was steady, my arguments clear, and I could see the professors nodding along. I spoke with the kind of confidence that comes from knowing every word is built on hours of research and work. When I finished, there was a beat of silence before polite applause filled the room. One hurdle cleared, then it was Dipshit's turn. He shuffled forward and stared at the screen for a full 5 seconds, long enough for everyone to start shifting in their seats. Then he started talking, and it was a train wreck. He repeated almost everything I had just said, sometimes word for word. He rambled aimlessly about statistics he clearly didn't understand. At one point, he said, "Furthermore," 3 times in a row before pausing to mutter, and "yeah, so," for what felt like an eternity. He added nothing new, introduced no analysis, and failed to connect his section to mine or Mark's. He read numbers straight off the poster like a kid stalling for time during a book report he hadn't read. The room shifted from polite attention to second-hand embarrassment. I could feel eyes darting toward me and Mark, as if to say, "Is this guy serious?" One of the professors scribbled something on his clipboard, the other just sighed. Mark went last, and though his part was excellent, Dipshit's disaster had ruined the flow of our presentation. Mark's section was supposed to contextualize the data, but Dipshit had already blurted out the raw numbers without explanation. Mark did his best to rebuild the structure of the argument, but the damage was done. Still, he handled it like a pro, confident, clear, and collected. And by the end, we at least managed to salvage the overall impression. Then came the Q&A. This was the part I'd been dreading. The professors asked sharp, specific questions, the kind meant to reveal whether we truly understood our research. I handled mine easily. After weeks of deep reading, I could talk about our topic in my sleep. Mark did just as well, answering questions with precision and citing sources from memory. Then they turned to Dipshit. The first question was simple, basic even. He froze. He stared at the professor like he'd just been asked to recite the periodic table backward. After an agonizing pause, he mumbled, "That's part of my name's research." The room was silent. The professor blinked. "I'm asking you," he said. Dipshit repeated, "Yeah, that's part of their research." It happened again and again. Every question directed at him, even ones about the numbers he had read aloud, got the same pathetic answer. That's part of their research. Each time, I calmly stepped in and answered, explaining the context he didn't know and the reasoning he didn't understand. And every time I did, it made him look even worse by comparison. By the time the Q&A ended, he was practically melting into the floor. The professors thanked us and dismissed the group. I turned around and saw faces in the audience ranging from pity to amusement to outright disgust. Dipshit walked back to his seat without a word. Mark and I exchanged a look, part relief, part exhaustion. We had done everything we could, and now it was out of our hands. The grades would come in a few weeks, but I was confident I had secured something solid enough to keep my stipend safe. Dipshit, on the other hand, had likely tanked his own grade beyond repair. As I packed up my things, I thought about his words from 6 weeks ago. It's not my problem that you're broke. And now here he was, too lazy to open a laptop, too arrogant to care, and too unprepared to save himself from public humiliation. I didn't need to say anything. His failure spoke louder than I ever could. The hours after the presentation felt surreal. When I walked out of that lecture hall, it was like a weight I'd been carrying for 6 weeks suddenly shifted. Not gone, but lighter. Mark patted me on the back, a grin creeping across his face. "We nailed it," he said. And we had. Despite the chaos Dipshit brought to the table, our work had shone through. But behind us, I could hear Dipshit's dragging footsteps echoing down the hall like a funeral march. He didn't speak to us, didn't look at us. He just kept walking, eyes fixed on the floor. For the first time since the project began, he looked small. It wasn't triumph I felt, not entirely. It was something colder. Satisfaction, maybe. Justice. The rest of the class had seen everything. As we left, a few classmates approached me and Mark. "Dude, your section was amazing," one said. "Yeah, I felt bad for you guys having to work with that," another whispered, jerking their head toward Dipshit, who was now sitting on a bench scrolling aimlessly on his phone. Apparently, his performance had become the talk of the hallway. I heard snippets of conversations as we passed. "Did you see how unprepared he was? Imagine showing up with nothing and blaming someone else's research." Bro literally said, "That's not my problem," and it was his problem. I didn't participate, but I listened. I wanted this to sink in for him. Not just that he embarrassed himself, but that everyone knew why. Later that day, I received an unexpected email. The professor wanted to meet with me and Mark the next afternoon. My stomach dropped at first. What if something had gone wrong? What if, despite everything, we were still going to be penalized because of his mess? When we walked into the office, though, the professor wasn't angry. He was smiling. "I wanted to personally commend you both," he began. "The level of work you produced under those circumstances was exceptional. I reviewed the individual contributions you submitted, and it's clear who carried the project." I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. He continued, "As I mentioned before, I will be grading individually. Your work will reflect the quality of what you did, not what someone else failed to do. And between us," he leaned back slightly, "I don't think Dipshit will pass this course." I didn't smile, but I won't pretend there wasn't a part of me that felt vindicated. The same person who mocked my situation, who dismissed my future like it was a joke, was now watching his own slip away. The following week, campus gossip had moved on, but not entirely. People still snickered when Dipshit entered the lecture hall. A meme even circulated in our group chat, a photo of a blank PowerPoint slide titled, "That's part of OP's research." It became a running joke in the department. Every time someone forgot an answer in class, someone else would whisper, "That's part of OP's research," and everyone would laugh. Dipshit hated it. You could see it in the way his jaw clenched every time the phrase popped up. He started sitting alone. He skipped group study sessions. For someone who wanted to coast through university unnoticed, he had become the center of attention, for all the wrong reasons. Then came the grades. I remember the email arriving late in the evening. My hands shook as I opened it. A, perfect. My stipend was safe. My future was safe. I reread the message twice just to be sure. Mark got an A too. We texted each other immediately, just emojis, and we did it in all caps, but it felt like a victory months in the making. The next day, Dipshit didn't show up to class. Rumour was he failed the project and, combined with his other grades, was now at risk of being put on academic probation. I didn't celebrate that part, not out loud anyway, but I did think back to his words on that second week. "It's not my problem that you're broke." Now he was the one facing consequences. And it still wasn't my problem. About a week later, I ran into him by chance in the library. He was hunched over a laptop, surrounded by papers, a look of panic carved into his face. He didn't notice me at first, but when he did, he looked away immediately. I could have walked over. I could have rubbed it in, said something cutting and cruel. Instead, I just stood there for a moment, watching him stew in the mess he'd created, and then walked away. It was better this way. No yelling, no revenge speech, just silence, and the knowledge that his downfall had been entirely his own doing. By the time the next semester rolled around, the story of our disastrous group project had become something of a legend in the department. It wasn't just whispered among students anymore. Professors referenced it indirectly when warning classes about teamwork and accountability. "You don't want to end up like that one guy from last term," one lecturer joked during a lecture. Everyone laughed. Everyone knew exactly who he meant. Dipshit became a ghost of himself. He still showed up sometimes, slinking into the back row of the lecture hall and leaving as soon as class ended. But the loud, cocky attitude he'd flaunted in the beginning was gone. People stopped inviting him to group work altogether. Nobody wanted to risk their grade on someone with a reputation for freeloading. Even the people who had once tolerated him now avoided eye contact in the hallway. The real blow, though, came a few weeks into the new semester. Word started circulating that he'd been called in for a meeting with the department head. Apparently, his overall GPA had tanked, and he was dangerously close to losing his scholarship. Someone who had once bragged about how failing one project doesn't matter was now one step away from academic suspension. And yet, he still didn't apologize. He didn't approach me. He didn't approach Mark. It was like he had decided to pretend we didn't exist, as if erasing the memory would erase the humiliation. But that's the thing about reputations in academia. Once they stick, they're almost impossible to scrub off. Meanwhile, things changed for me too. The project, as stressful as it was, had made professors take notice. One of them, impressed by the depth of my research, recommended me for a part-time research assistant position. It wasn't just a financial boost, it was a line on my CV that could open doors for future opportunities. Mark got an offer too, to help design data visuals for a faculty-led project. We had turned a nightmare into a launchpad. One afternoon, I ran into Dipshit again, this time in the student cafeteria. He was sitting alone, poking at a plate of fries like they had personally offended him. I was going to walk past, but then he looked up and, for the first time, actually spoke to me. "Hey," he said quietly, "can we talk?" I didn't sit. I didn't even step closer. "About what?" he sighed. "About the project. About how it went down. Look, I didn't think it was that serious, all right? I thought I could wing it like I always do. I didn't think it'd blow up in my face. I crossed my arms. You were told, repeatedly, how serious it was. I told you what was at stake for me." "Yeah," he muttered, eyes dropping to the table. "And I was an ass about it." For a second, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. But then I remembered the sneer on his face when he'd said, "Not my problem that you're broke," and the sympathy vanished. "You weren't just an ass," I said calmly. "You jeopardized my future because you were too lazy to care." You don't get to shrug that off with a half apology. He looked like he wanted to argue, but instead, he just nodded. "Yeah, fair enough." I left without saying another word. There was nothing more to say. A few weeks later, the final blow landed. A professor mentioned in passing that a student had been caught plagiarizing parts of a take-home exam. The rumor mill went wild, and it didn't take long for the name to surface. Dipshit. Apparently, he'd copied sections from an online source almost word for word. The disciplinary board got involved, and while I never learned the full details, I did know one thing. He didn't come back the next semester. No official announcement, no goodbye posts on the student forums. He just vanished. Some said he transferred to a less competitive program. Others said he dropped out entirely. Whatever the truth, he became exactly what he had accused me of being. Someone whose situation was no longer anyone else's problem. As for me, that project changed something fundamental. It taught me that standing up for myself wasn't petty, it was necessary. It taught me that sometimes the best revenge isn't about plotting or payback. It's about being excellent despite the obstacles someone tries to throw at you. And perhaps most satisfying of all, months later, when scholarship renewal letters went out, mine came with a personal note from the head of the department. "Your work last semester demonstrated exceptional resilience and academic integrity. We're proud to have you here." I pinned that note to my desk, not just as a reminder of what I'd achieved, but as proof that his failure and my success had always been in my own hands. The weeks after Dipshit vanished were strange. At first, there was this quiet buzz around campus, as if everyone was waiting for some sort of official confirmation. Rumors swirled. Maybe he was suspended. Maybe he'd been given one last chance. Maybe his parents had pulled strings to get him into another university. But slowly, as the semester pressed forward and new deadlines replaced old drama, his name stopped coming up altogether. It was as though the ground had swallowed him whole. For me, though, life didn't slow down. The research assistant job I'd been offered turned out to be more intense than I expected, but I loved every second of it. I was part of a team that was working on something that might actually make it into a published paper, and for the first time, I felt like I wasn't just studying, I was contributing. The stipend from that position, combined with the renewal of my scholarship, meant I could breathe a little easier. No more lying awake at night wondering if I'd have to pack up and leave everything behind. Mark and I stayed close too. We joked often about the project from hell, and every time a new group project was announced, we made sure we were assigned together. We'd learned the hard way that trust was everything in academic work, and we weren't going to let someone else jeopardize our futures again. Professors had taken notice of us as well, often pairing us on advanced assignments or recommending us for collaborative projects. It was a subtle but deeply satisfying shift, from stressed students scrambling to save a grade to reliable contributors known for quality work. Still, every once in a while, when the campus was quiet and I passed by the room where we'd done our presentation, the memory would replay. The silence in the room as dipshit rambled, the professors' faces, polite but unimpressed, the students shifting uncomfortably in their seats. The way he'd looked when he realised he had nothing to say. There was no joy in that memory, not really. Just a deep, bone-level satisfaction that justice, not revenge, but justice, had been served. It also changed the way I approached people. Before that semester, I was the kind of person who tried to give everyone the benefit of the doubt. I assumed laziness was just stress, or that carelessness was just a bad day. But now I understood that some people choose to be selfish. They gamble with other people's lives and futures because they think the consequences will never reach them. And when they lose, they expect sympathy. I had none left to give. One evening, near the end of the term, I was sitting in the campus cafe with Mark when one of the professors from our project walked in. He spotted us, waved, and came over. "You know," he said with a small smile, "I've used your project as a case study in my seminar twice this month." Mark raised an eyebrow. "Case study? You mean as a warning?" "Not exactly," the professor chuckled, "as an example of resilience, of what it means to adapt when someone on your team refuses to pull their weight. Most students crumble in that situation. You didn't. It was a simple comment, but it stuck with me long after he left. Because in that moment, I realised something I hadn't fully processed before. That disaster of a project wasn't just an obstacle, it was a test, and we passed it. A few months later, during a routine lab meeting, I overheard a conversation that made me freeze. A new student had joined the department mid-year, and he was talking to someone about his old school. "Yeah," he said casually, "one of the guys who came in with me got expelled for academic dishonesty, tried to cheat his way through and got caught. I didn't ask for a name. I didn't need to. Deep down, I already knew. And for the first time since the chaos began, I didn't feel anger or even satisfaction. I felt nothing at all. It was over. He was gone. My life had moved on, upward even, and his had stalled because of his own choices. There was no poetic justice, no dramatic confrontation, no final moment of triumph. Just a quiet, inevitable conclusion. That's the thing about revenge. You think it's going to be this explosive, cathartic moment, fireworks and fanfare, and maybe a dramatic one-liner. But in reality, the best revenge is silent. It happens when you stop thinking about the person who wronged you because they're no longer relevant. When your life becomes something they can only watch from the outside. The semester finally ended on a cold, windy morning that smelled like rain and new beginnings. I remember walking across the courtyard, the weight of the past few months settling into something lighter, something I could finally breathe through. Grades had been posted the night before. I had passed, not just passed, but excelled. My essay had been praised for its clarity and depth, and my presentation score reflected the hours of preparation Mark and I had poured into it. Dipshit's grade, on the other hand, was a different story. He hadn't met the minimum requirements. The official note beside his name said, "Incomplete contribution, individual evaluation applied." Rumour had it he'd tried to appeal, claiming that we excluded him, but the evidence we'd shown, his missed meetings, his messages refusing to work, his complete absence from every step of the process, spoke louder than his words. The appeal was denied. That was the last anyone heard of him. In the weeks that followed, I found myself reflecting on the entire ordeal more than I expected. At first, it was all anger, raw and bitter. Anger that someone could be so selfish. Anger that my future could have been jeopardized by someone else's laziness. But slowly, that anger faded into something quieter, deeper. It became a lesson. I learned that not everyone will care as much as you do, that some people will treat your effort like it's disposable, something they can take advantage of. And when they do, you have a choice. You can let them drag you down with them, or you can rise above and let their failure be their own. I also learned that revenge doesn't have to be loud or cruel. It doesn't have to mean sabotage or hatred. Sometimes the most devastating revenge is simply refusing to let someone else's mediocrity define you and letting them fail by the weight of their own choices. Watching dipshit stumble and crumble in front of an entire class wasn't about humiliating him. It was about showing him, and myself, that actions have consequences. Life moved on, as it always does. Mark and I stayed friends. We worked together again in future courses and even collaborated on a small research project that got presented at a student conference. Professors began to see me as someone dependable, not just smart, but resilient under pressure. That reputation followed me into internships and job interviews. In a strange, twisted way, that awful group project became one of the most defining experiences of my academic life. Sometimes, when I walk past the building where it all happened, I still think about dipshit. Not with anger, not even with satisfaction, just a kind of detached curiosity. I wonder if he learned anything from it. If he ever understood how much his apathy could have cost someone else. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't. But that's the thing, it's no longer my problem. What is my problem, my responsibility, is making sure I never let someone else's carelessness dictate the direction of my life again. And that's a promise I intend to keep, because at the end of the day, this wasn't just a story about a lazy teammate or a sabotage project. It was about standing up for myself in a system that often rewards silence. It was about choosing dignity over resentment. And it was about learning that the best victories don't always happen in front of an audience. Sometimes they happen quietly, when you walk away stronger than before. I walked out of that semester with my scholarship intact, my future secure, and my confidence unshaken. And as far as I'm concerned, that was the sweetest revenge of all.